She thought she was safe. The doors were locked, the past was behind her, and the man she once feared was nothing more than a bad memory. But memories don't break down doors. Memories don't pull triggers. It was supposed to be just another afternoon, an ordinary day in a life she had fought so hard to rebuild. But as she turned, her breath caught in her throat. He was there. Inside. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to find her. He didn't speak. He didn't hesitate. The first shot ripped through the silence, then another, and another. 7 times, the walls shook with the violence of a man who had come to take back what he believed was his. 7 times, her body jerked from the force of the bullets. And then, nothing. He stood over her, watching, his hands steady, his heart unmoved. He had done exactly what he came here to do. But how did it come to this? How does a love story end with blood on the floor? What happened between them that made him believe she didn't deserve to live without him? Stay with us as we pull back the layers of a love gone wrong, a betrayal that cut too deep, and an obsession that would only end when he was the last man standing. Before we go deeper into the story, we welcome you to our channel, True Crime Zone HQ. Thank you to all our viewers and a special shout out to our subscribers for your continued support. Together, we strive to improve and bring you daily updates on both told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Monique Aldrich was the kind of woman who seemed unstoppable. She was born and raised in Hayward, California, in a household that valued hard work, education, and resilience. From a young age, it was clear that she wasn't like everyone else. She wasn't just smart, she was gifted. Some people move through life waiting for opportunities to come to them, but Monique wasn't one of those people. She created her opportunities, built her future with her own 2 hands. She understood, even as a child, that nothing was guaranteed in life, that success wasn't something handed to you, it was something you earned. Monique had a sharp mind, an insatiable curiosity, and a drive that seemed to push her beyond what anyone expected. She was the kind of person who didn't just meet expectations, she shattered them. By the time she was 16, when most teenagers were thinking about prom and learning how to drive, Monique had already graduated high school and was well on her way to earning a degree in biology at the University of California, Davis. She wasn't just a straight-A student, she was a prodigy, someone who refused to settle for anything less than excellence. But it wasn't just about intelligence, it was about something more. Monique had an energy about her, a fire that made people believe in her, a presence that made her impossible to ignore. She wasn't the type to blend in. She stood out, not just because of what she could do, but because of who she was. She was someone people admired, respected, and looked up to. And she was just getting started. While some people struggled to find their path, Monique always knew where she was headed. Science fascinated her, the human body intrigued her, but more than anything, she had a passion for helping others. She wanted to make a difference. She didn't just want to study biology, she wanted to use it, apply it, to do something meaningful with it. But there was another side to Monique, something beyond her academic success. She had a deep love for fitness and health, something that wasn't just a personal interest but a way of life. She believed that taking care of your body was just as important as taking care of your mind. She wasn't just passionate about her own physical fitness, she wanted to help others achieve their goals too. And so, while juggling a demanding education and a promising career in healthcare, she did something that most people wouldn't dare attempt. She started her own business. A personal training company, built from the ground up, fueled by her passion for transforming lives. It wasn't just about getting people in shape. It was about empowerment. Monique didn't believe in shortcuts, in easy fixes, in quick results that didn't last. She believed in strength, not just physical, but mental. She believed in discipline, in the power of hard work, in the ability to push past limits. Her business wasn't just about fitness. It was about confidence, determination, resilience, the very things that had defined her own journey. She wanted to give that to other people, to help them see what they were capable of. And she did. She wasn't just a trainer. She was a mentor, a motivator, a source of inspiration to everyone she worked with. She had a way of bringing out the best in people, of making them believe in themselves the way she believed in them. She didn't just tell people they could succeed, she showed them how. Monique was a builder. She built her education, she built her career, and she built a business that reflected everything she stood for. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. And she wanted more. For all her success, Monique wasn't just focused on work. She wanted balance. She wanted love, a family, a life beyond her career. She believed that happiness wasn't just about professional achievements, it was about the people you surrounded yourself with, the love you built, the connections that mattered. She had always believed in the idea of finding the right person, someone who would stand beside her, someone who shared her vision for life. She wanted partnership, not control. She wanted a relationship built on mutual respect, not power. She wanted to share her life, not be consumed by someone else's expectations. Monique was not the kind of woman to settle for less than she deserved. She had worked too hard, come too far, built too much to let anyone take that away from her. She had seen what happened to women who gave too much to the wrong person, who lost themselves in relationships that drained them instead of lifting them up. She wasn't going to let that happen to her. She believed in love. But she also believed in self-worth. It takes a special kind of strength to walk away from something you once thought was perfect. To recognize that love isn't enough when it comes with conditions, when it starts to feel more like a prison than a partnership. To know, deep in your heart, that you deserve more, even when walking away means stepping into the unknown. Monique had that strength. She knew what it meant to fight for herself, to protect her future, to choose herself over a relationship that no longer served her. She had done it once. She would have to do it again. But this time, the consequences would be devastating. Because walking away is only an option when the person you're leaving is willing to let you go. And Von Boatner was not. There was a time when Von Boatner wasn't the monster he would later become. At least, that's what Monique believed. When she met him, there were no flashing red lights, no alarms ringing in her head telling her to run. He wasn't perfect, but who was? He had charm, he had presence, and for a while, that was enough. In the beginning, it was easy to ignore the things that didn't quite add up. He made her feel special, like she was the center of his world. He knew how to say the right things, how to make her laugh, how to make her feel like she had finally found someone who understood her. Maybe that was what drew her to him. He wasn't intimidated by her success the way others had been. He didn't seem bothered by her ambition, by the fact that she was always striving for more. If anything, he admired it. Or at least, that's what he made her believe. Their love story started fast, the kind of whirlwind romance that sweeps you off your feet before you've had a chance to question where the ground went. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and for a woman like Monique, who had spent her entire life working toward her goals, it felt good to finally be caught up in something that wasn't about ambition or achievements. It was about love, about passion, about connection. At first, Vaughn seemed like the perfect complement to her. He was confident, smooth, the kind of man who could command a room with nothing more than his presence. There was an intensity to him, something that made it feel like when he was with you, you were the only thing that mattered. For a woman like Monique, who had spent so much of her life focused on building a future, it felt like a relief to be with someone who didn't just tolerate her success, he encouraged it. But love, as powerful as it is, can sometimes blind you to the truth. There were signs, small at first, easy to dismiss, even easier to explain away. The way he always needed to know where she was, who she was with. The way his mood could shift in an instant, warm and affectionate one moment, distant and cold the next. The way his compliments sometimes carried an edge, like they were meant to remind her that no matter how strong she was, he was stronger. Maybe she saw the signs. Maybe she didn't. Or maybe, like so many others before her, she believed that love was about patience, about working through problems, about giving someone a chance to be better. For a while, it worked. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But Von Boatner was not a man who knew how to love. He was a man who knew how to possess. Their relationship moved quickly, and before long, what had started as passion turned into something else, something Monique couldn't quite name at first. He wanted her time, her attention, her energy, and little by little, he made sure he was at the center of everything she did. It started with small requests, canceling plans so they could spend more time together, skipping workouts to stay in with him. At first, it felt like love. He just wanted to be with her. He cared. But caring shouldn't feel suffocating. Monique, independent and headstrong, had never been the type of woman to let anyone control her. But control doesn't always come in the form of raised voices or locked doors. Sometimes, it comes wrapped in concern, disguised as love. It's the "Are you sure you want to go out tonight? I just miss you." It's the "I don't like that guy, he's always looking at you. Don't you see it?" It's the "I need you. You're the only person who understands me. Without you, I don't know what I'd do." By the time she realized what was happening, it had already become a pattern. Vaughn had woven himself into her life in a way that was hard to untangle. There were good days, of course. That's what made it so complicated. When things were good, they were good. He would hold her close, whisper promises about their future, remind her why she had fallen for him in the first place. But when things were bad, they were devastating. The arguments weren't just disagreements, they were battles, and Vaughn always needed to win. When they fought, his words cut deep. He knew exactly where to aim. "You think you're better than me, don't you? Without me, who else would even want you? You act so tough, but I know you. I know what you're really like. No one else does." It was never loud. Never physical. At least, not yet. But his words chipped away at her, piece by piece, until sometimes she found herself questioning things she had never questioned before. She told herself it wasn't that bad. That all couples argued. That maybe if she just loved him a little more, if she showed him that he didn't need to feel insecure, things would get better. But love cannot fix a man who refuses to fix himself. She didn't know it yet, but Von Boatner's past was not one of redemption. It was one of destruction. He had always been this way. He had just been waiting for her to see it. Have you ever noticed small warning signs in a relationship that later turned into something worse? Drop a comment below. There is always a moment in every failed relationship where everything shifts, where the weight of resentment becomes too heavy to carry, where the illusion of love finally shatters, leaving behind nothing but the raw, unfiltered truth. For Monique Aldridge, that moment didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a sudden explosion of realization, a single fight that made her see the reality of what she had been trying to ignore. No, it was slower than that, creeping in like a slow-moving storm, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore once it was fully overhead. By the time she saw it for what it was, she was already in the middle of it. Von Boatner had always had a way of controlling the narrative. He knew how to shift blame, how to twist words, how to make her feel like she was the one overreacting. If she questioned his behavior, she was being paranoid. If she pulled away, she was abandoning him. If she got upset, it was because she didn't understand how much he loved her. But love isn't supposed to feel like a war. And for Monique, every day started to feel like a battle she never signed up for. Maybe she knew it wasn't working long before she admitted it to herself. Maybe she had been holding on because she wanted to believe in the good, because she had convinced herself that love meant fighting through the hard times. But love is supposed to be safe. Love is supposed to be mutual. And love is not supposed to feel like something you have to survive. She had survived enough. And Vaughn, he could feel it slipping away. He could feel her slipping away. There had been whispers of infidelity, on his part, on hers. The truth was somewhere in the middle, buried beneath the accusations and the shouting matches that had become their reality. Maybe Vaughn had cheated. Maybe he hadn't. But what mattered was that Monique suspected he had. And more than that, she had reached a point where she was tired of trying to make sense of it all. There was no trust left. She had given him everything, her time, her energy, her love, and in return, she felt exhausted. It wasn't just the arguments. It wasn't just the way he always seemed to twist things to make himself the victim. It was the emotional exhaustion of constantly being the one to fix things, of feeling like no matter what she did, it would never be enough. She couldn't live like this anymore. She didn't want to live like this anymore. And so, she made a decision, one that women in her situation don't always get to make. She decided to leave. For the first time in a long time, she chose herself. She told him it was over. And Vaughn Boatner, he did not take it well. At first, it was anger, explosive, vicious, the kind that makes you question whether you really know the person standing in front of you. He accused her of betraying him, of throwing away everything they had built. He wanted her to take it back, to reconsider, to understand that he was the only one who truly loved her. But Monique had spent enough time understanding him. She had spent enough nights justifying his temper, brushing off his jealousy, convincing herself that things would get better if she just tried harder. She wasn't going to do it anymore. She wanted out. But some men do not let go. Vaughn wasn't the type of man to simply walk away, to accept the reality that Monique was no longer his to control. To him, this wasn't just a breakup. It was an insult. A betrayal. An attack on his pride. He had spent years making sure she was his. He had woven himself into her life, into her identity, and now she wanted to erase him. No. That wasn't going to happen. At first, he tried the usual tactics. He begged. He promised to change. He reminded her of the good times, the laughter, the love. But Monique had heard it all before. She wasn't falling for it. And when he realized that the begging wasn't working, that the sweet words and empty apologies weren't enough to bring her back, the threats began. Not loud, not obvious. But they were there. The subtle warnings. The possessive remarks disguised as concern. You think you can just move on? Like I never existed? If I can't have you, do you really think anyone else will? You don't get to just erase me, Monique. The way he showed up unannounced. The way he always seemed to know where she was. The way he reminded her, in ways both small and terrifying, that he was always watching. And Monique, strong, independent, fearless Monique, started to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Fear. She didn't talk about it much. She didn't want to give him that power. But those closest to her started to notice the change. The way she checked over her shoulder more often. The way she kept her doors locked, even in the middle of the day. The way her once carefree laughter had started to fade. She was afraid of the man she once loved. And she had every reason to be. But Monique was not the kind of woman to live in fear. She had spent her entire life fighting to build the future she wanted, and she wasn't about to let Vaughn take that from her. She moved on. She focused on her career. She poured herself into her business, into the people who relied on her. She built a new life, one that was hers and hers alone. But, if you think Monique made a right decision to move on, subscribe to this channel. Monique Aldrich was finally free, or at least, that's what she allowed herself to believe. After years of feeling trapped, controlled, and weighed down by a man who only knew how to take from her, she had done the impossible. She had left. She had rebuilt. She had found herself again. Her career had never been stronger. She had poured herself into her work, channeling every ounce of energy into growing her business, into helping others find their strength. She surrounded herself with friends who reminded her of the woman she had always been, independent, resilient, unstoppable. And then, something she never expected happened. She found love again. He was different from Vaughn in every way. Where Vaughn had been possessive, this man was patient. Where Vaughn had demanded control, he offered trust. He didn't try to shape her into something else, didn't make her feel like she had to shrink herself to fit inside his world. He loved her for exactly who she was. And for the first time in a long time, Monique allowed herself to exhale. She had met him through mutual friends, at a time when she wasn't even looking for romance. She had been too focused on her business, too wary of falling into the same kind of relationship she had barely escaped. But love has a way of finding you when you least expect it. At first, she was hesitant. She had been burned before, and she knew what it felt like to mistake possession for love, manipulation for devotion. She wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. But he was patient, understanding. He never pushed, never made her feel like she had to justify herself. With him, love wasn't a battle, it was effortless. And then, happiness she never thought she would feel again became her reality. She had a new home, a place that was hers and hers alone, untouched by the ghosts of her past. She had a man who loved her the way she deserved to be loved. She had a future that, for the first time, wasn't clouded by fear. And then, the biggest blessing of all. She was pregnant. The news filled her with emotions she hadn't expected, excitement, joy, a deep sense of purpose. This baby was proof that her past did not define her. That she had broken free. That she was living again. She didn't think about Vaughn anymore. She had moved on. What she didn't know was that he hadn't. She didn't know that while she was planning a future, Vaughn was watching. That while she was rebuilding, he was waiting. Waiting for the moment he would take everything away. He found out by accident. Maybe it was a friend who let something slip. Maybe it was a photo that popped up on his feed, an image of her smiling, standing beside another man. Maybe it was a casual mention from someone who didn't realize that what they were saying would send him over the edge. Or maybe it was something else entirely. Maybe he had never stopped looking for her. Maybe he had spent hours scrolling through her old pictures, searching for any sign that she was missing him, that she regretted leaving him. Maybe he had gone to the places they used to go together, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, to remind himself that she was real. And then, there it was. Proof. She wasn't missing him. She wasn't suffering without him. She was happy. And not just happy, in love. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. The thought of another man touching her, holding her, hearing her laugh in the way that had once been reserved for him, it was unacceptable. And then, he found out about the baby. A child. A future that didn't include him. That was the moment the obsession turned into something worse. He started watching her more closely, tracking her movements, memorizing her routine. He needed to understand how this had happened, why she had been able to move on when he was still drowning in his own misery. Maybe he followed her car from a distance, never getting too close, just far enough to know where she was going, who she was with. Maybe he parked outside her home at night, watching the lights flicker behind the curtains, imagining what she was doing inside. Was she laughing with him? Was she dreaming about the life they were building together? Had she forgotten about Vaughn completely? He read her old messages, replayed the last conversations they had, searching for some sign that this had been inevitable. But no matter how many times he went over it, it didn't make sense. She had loved him once. Hadn't she? So what changed? He told himself she must have lied to him, must have deceived him. There was no way she could have just walked away. There was no way she had been able to just erase him from her life. Not without consequences. And then, the anger came. It started small, an irritation that sat in the back of his mind, a frustration that he couldn't shake. But anger doesn't stay small for long. It grows, it spreads, until it takes over everything. He told himself that this wasn't over. That she owed him something. That she had no right to move on without his permission. She had forgotten who he was. And now, he would remind her. Monique had no idea that the man she had once loved was unraveling. She had no reason to believe that her past would come knocking on her door. She felt safe. She had done everything right, cut ties, changed her number, built a life that was entirely separate from him. She wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore. She wasn't checking the locks twice before going to bed. But maybe she should have been. Because Vaughn was no longer just angry. He was ready. She had moved on. And he was about to make sure she never took another step forward again. It was a quiet afternoon in Hayward, California, the kind of day where everything felt normal, where people went about their routines without a second thought. The neighborhood was still, the air calm, and inside her home, Monique Aldridge had no reason to suspect that anything was about to change. She was safe, or at least she believed she was. The doors were locked, her son was nearby, and her boyfriend, the man who had given her hope again, was with her. There was no reason to be afraid, no warning that danger was only moments away. She had spent months rebuilding her life, leaving behind the shadows of a past that had threatened to consume her. She had found love again, had allowed herself to believe in happiness, had begun preparing for the arrival of a child who would symbolize a future free from the pain of what she had left behind. She had stopped looking over her shoulder, had stopped wondering if Vaughn Boatner would come back, had stopped believing that he had any power over her. In her mind, that chapter was over, and she was finally living the life she had fought so hard to create. But outside, just beyond the walls of her home, the man she had escaped was standing there, waiting. He had been watching, memorizing her every move, waiting for the perfect moment to take everything away. The thought of her with another man had pushed him past the edge, the knowledge that she was pregnant with another man's child had sealed her fate in his mind. He wasn't going to let her have this life. He wasn't going to let her move forward. If he couldn't have her, no one would. He made his way to the front door, his hands steady, his mind already made up. The weight of the gun in his grip felt familiar, reassuring, like an extension of his own rage. He had replayed this moment in his head over and over again, imagining every possible outcome, but in the end, they all led to the same thing: Monique would not walk away from him again. The door opened, whether because it had been left unlocked or because he forced his way in, and the moment he stepped inside, the air shifted. Monique didn't see him at first, didn't realize that her past had just walked into her present. Maybe she was laughing with her boyfriend, lost in the warmth of the life she had created. Maybe she was thinking about the baby, about what the future would look like. But when she turned and saw Vaughn standing there, time seemed to stop. For a split second, there was nothing but silence, a moment suspended between recognition and terror, between the past and the present colliding in the worst way possible. He didn't speak. There were no final words, no warnings, no chance for her to reason with him. The decision had already been made long before this moment. He raised the gun and pulled the trigger. The first shot tore through the air, cutting through the silence, a deafening sound that shattered the stillness of the home. The bullet struck her before she had a chance to react, the force sending her backward, pain radiating through her body before she could even process what was happening. Before she could take a breath, the second shot followed, then a third. The gunfire echoed through the house, each shot deliberate, each one meant to make sure she would never get back up again. Her boyfriend tried to move, tried to intervene, but Vaughn was faster. The gun turned on him next, a single shot to the stomach sending him collapsing to the floor. He clutched the wound, gasping for breath, watching as Monique's body fell to the ground, her life slipping away in front of him. 7 bullets. 7. Each one intentional. Each one designed to make sure there was no coming back. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, it was over. The house fell silent, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood. Vaughn stood there, unmoving, his eyes fixed on the woman he had once claimed to love, the woman he had just executed without a second thought. There was no regret on his face, no hesitation in his actions. He had done what he came here to do, and in his mind, it was justified. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. The neighbors had heard the shots, but for a moment, there was uncertainty. Gunfire wasn't something they expected to hear in this quiet neighborhood, and for a few seconds, people froze, trying to convince themselves that it had been something else, fireworks, a car backfiring, anything but what it really was. And then, the realization set in. Someone had been shot. Inside the house, Monique lay motionless, her blood spreading across the floor, her body still as the life she had fought so hard to reclaim was stolen from her in an instant. Her boyfriend, still alive, tried to move, tried to reach her, but his own wound made it impossible. The weight of his own body felt too heavy, his vision blurring as the pain consumed him. And in the middle of it all, standing just feet away, was Monique's 5-year-old son. He hadn't moved. He hadn't screamed. Maybe he was too young to fully understand what had just happened, or maybe he understood too well. His mother was lying on the ground, not moving, not speaking, not breathing. The man who had once been part of his life, the man who was supposed to love and protect her, had just taken her away. The sirens came fast, breaking through the silence, growing louder with every second. By the time the first responders arrived, the neighborhood had gathered outside, their faces a mix of horror and disbelief. No one could process what had just happened. No one could understand how something like this could unfold in a place that had always felt safe. The paramedics rushed inside, but it was too late. Monique Aldrich was gone. The woman who had built herself from nothing, who had fought for everything she had, who had tried to escape a past that refused to let her go, had taken her final breath on the floor of her own home. Her boyfriend, barely holding on, was rushed to the hospital, his fate uncertain. And Vaughn. He was already gone. The man who had once vowed to love her, who had once been part of her life, had walked away without a second glance, without hesitation, without remorse. He had done what he came to do, and now, he had disappeared. But no one runs forever. And soon, the hunt for a killer would begin. Before we continue, Monique didn't deserve to be taken away just because she chose to move, because she tried to find love again. If you condemn Vaughn's action of taking an innocent life, Monique, subscribe to this channel and tell us in the comments how do you think this could have been avoided. The moment Vaughn Boatner stepped out of that house, he became a fugitive. He had fired the shots, watched Monique collapse, and without hesitation, he turned and walked away, stepping over the life he had just stolen. He didn't look back. He didn't check to see if anyone had noticed. He didn't hesitate. This was not a crime of impulse. He had planned this. He knew exactly what he was doing, and just as he had arrived with purpose, he left with it too. He wasn't going to wait for the police to arrive, wasn't going to stay and face the consequences of what he had done. He had only one goal now, to disappear. By the time the first police cars pulled up to the house, the sirens cutting through the stillness of the neighborhood, Vaughn was already miles away. He hadn't fled in a panic, hadn't left in a hurry. That wasn't his way. He had been careful, methodical. He had known that once he pulled that trigger, there was no coming back from it, and he had prepared for what came next. He had a plan. Somewhere along the way, he ditched his car, the one that could be traced back to him, left behind anything that could slow him down. He knew how investigations worked. He knew the first thing the police would do was start putting the pieces together, looking for connections, figuring out where he might go. He needed to be ahead of them, needed to be gone before they even had a chance to catch up. As the crime scene was being processed, as officers stepped into the house and saw the reality of what had just happened, Vaughn was already moving. He had vanished into the city, blending in among the thousands of people who had no idea that they were walking past a murderer. But no one stays invisible forever. The moment Monique's name hit the news, the moment police officially named Vaughn Boatner as the prime suspect, the search intensified. His face was plastered across every major news station, across social media, across police bulletins. He wasn't just a suspect, he was a wanted man. And the longer he was out there, the more dangerous he became. Authorities knew that this wasn't a case of a man who had lost control in the heat of the moment. Vaughn had acted with deliberation, with intention. He had executed Monique, shot her 7 times in the place she had called home, with her child just feet away. He had gunned down her boyfriend, leaving him barely clinging to life. And then, he had walked away as if nothing had happened. That kind of man doesn't just disappear. He was out there. Somewhere. And it was only a matter of time before he slipped up. The U.S. Marshals got involved, joining local law enforcement in the hunt for Vaughn Boatner. He had crossed state lines. The evidence pointed to one place, Seattle, Washington. He had gone as far as he could without raising suspicion, had managed to avoid being caught long enough to make it hundreds of miles away. But a man on the run is always looking over his shoulder. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone recognized him, before the weight of what he had done started closing in on him. And the problem with running is that no matter how far you go, you can never outrun yourself. For 11 days, he was a ghost. 11 days of hiding, of watching, of waiting. Maybe he thought he would get away with it. Maybe he thought the police wouldn't catch him, that he had covered his tracks well enough. Or maybe, he knew it was over the moment he pulled that trigger and was just delaying the inevitable. The arrest happened quietly. The authorities had been tracking his movements, following every lead, waiting for the right moment. He had made a mistake somewhere along the way, let his guard down just long enough for them to close in. And when they did, there was no struggle. No last-minute attempt to run. He didn't fight. He didn't beg. He didn't say a word. When they put the handcuffs on him, when they told him he was under arrest for the murder of Monique Aldridge, the attempted murder of her boyfriend, and child endangerment, he didn't flinch. There was no remorse on his face. No emotion. As if he had already accepted his fate. As if this had been the plan all along. The man who had once promised to love Monique, who had once convinced her that he was someone worth believing in, was now nothing more than a prisoner. And Monique? She was gone. She had spent her life building something beautiful, something meaningful, something worth fighting for. And in an instant, it had been stolen from her by the very person who had once claimed to love her. But now, he would answer for it. He had taken everything from her. And now, he had nothing left. The trial of Vaughn Boatner was not just about securing justice for Monique Aldridge, it was about bringing closure to a family that had been torn apart and ensuring that a man who believed he had the right to decide whether a woman lived or died would never have the chance to hurt another person again. From the moment he stepped into the courtroom, his expression remained unchanged, his demeanor cold and detached. There was no sign of remorse, no flicker of regret in his eyes. He sat still, silent, staring straight ahead as if none of this had anything to do with him. For Monique's family, walking into that courtroom was like reliving the nightmare all over again. They had already suffered the unbearable grief of losing her in such a violent, senseless way, but now they had to sit and listen as her final moments were examined, as every detail of that horrific day was laid out in front of strangers. They had to hear about the way she had collapsed after the first shot, how she had never had a chance to escape, how the life she had been building had been cut short in an instant. They had to hear about the way Vaughn had walked away without a second thought, how he had spent 11 days on the run as if he had done nothing wrong. They had to sit there, holding back tears, fists clenched, as the man responsible for all of it sat just feet away, completely unmoved by the pain he had caused. The prosecution wasted no time in laying out the case against him. The evidence was overwhelming, impossible to refute. The gun he had used was found, the bullets matched. Witnesses had seen him enter Monique's home that day, had heard the gunshots that followed. The forensic evidence proved beyond any doubt that he had fired those shots deliberately, that this was not a crime of passion but an execution. Monique's boyfriend, the man who had miraculously survived despite being shot, took the stand and recounted the terror of that afternoon, the way Vaughn had entered without a word, the way he had aimed with precision, the way he had stood over Monique as she lay dying, making sure there was no chance of survival before finally turning to leave. Perhaps the most heartbreaking testimony came from those who had known and loved Monique the most. Her family, her friends, the people who had watched her grow into the ambitious, driven woman she had become. They spoke about her determination, her kindness, the way she had touched the lives of so many people. They spoke about the fear she had carried in the months after leaving Vaughn, the quiet worry that no matter how much distance she put between them, he would always find a way back into her life. They spoke about how she had finally started to believe that she was free, how she had let go of that fear, how she had started to live again, only to have it all taken away in the most brutal way possible. When it was the defense's turn, they tried to paint a different picture. They wanted the jury to see Vaughn as a man who had been pushed to his breaking point, a man who had lost the woman he loved and had been unable to cope with the pain. They argued that he had acted in the heat of the moment, that he had been overwhelmed by emotions, that he had simply snapped. They wanted the court to believe that this was not premeditated, that Vaughn had not walked into that house intending to kill Monique, but had instead been overcome by grief and acted without thinking. But no one believed it. This had not been an impulsive crime. This had been a decision. Vaughn had tracked Monique, had waited for the right moment, had brought a gun to her house knowing exactly what he was going to do with it. He had fired 7 times. That wasn't the act of a man who had lost control, that was the act of a man who wanted to make sure she was never coming back. The jury saw through the defense's attempt to twist the story, and when the time came for deliberation, they didn't need long. In less than 3 hours, they returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. Vaughn Boatner was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and child endangerment. And when the judge handed down his sentence, there was no hesitation. Life in prison. No parole. No second chances. No escape. For Monique's family, the verdict brought a measure of relief. Vaughn would never be free again. He would never have the chance to hurt another woman, to steal another life. But relief was not the same as healing, and justice did not erase the grief that would linger for the rest of their lives. No sentence, no punishment, could bring Monique back. No amount of time served could undo what had already been done. The impact of her death rippled far beyond that courtroom. It left a hole in the lives of the people who had loved her, a wound that would never fully heal. Her parents, once so proud of the daughter they had raised, now had to live with the unbearable pain of knowing that she had been taken from them in the cruelest way imaginable. Her friends, the people who had celebrated her successes, had to carry the weight of her absence, knowing that there would always be one less voice in the room, one less laugh to fill the air. And then, there was her son. A child who had seen his mother die. A child who had witnessed an act of violence so profound that it would shape him for the rest of his life. He would never grow up with her love, her guidance, her warmth. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone would be shadowed by the knowledge of what had been stolen from him. He would have to live with questions no child should ever have to ask. Why? Why did this happen? Why did someone who was supposed to love my mother take her away from me? And the worst part was, there would never be a satisfying answer. Monique's story became more than just a case, it became a warning, a reminder of the dangers that exist in relationships built on control rather than love. It forced people to ask uncomfortable questions. Why do some men believe they have the right to possess a woman? Why do they think that if she chooses to leave, she no longer deserves to live? This was not just about one man's rage, it was about a mindset that exists in too many places, one that sees women not as individuals with their own lives, their own choices, but as things to be owned, controlled, and destroyed when they no longer serve their purpose. Possessiveness is not love. Jealousy is not devotion. And when those things are allowed to grow unchecked, they turn into something deadly. Monique Aldridge should still be here. She should have been able to raise her son, to welcome her new baby into the world, to continue building the future she had worked so hard for. She should have been able to live, to love, to exist without fear. But because one man could not accept that she had chosen happiness without him, she never got that chance. The trial ended, the verdict was read, and Vaughn Boatner was led away in handcuffs, sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a cage of his own making. But for the people Monique left behind, the pain didn't end when the courtroom emptied. The grief didn't fade when the headlines moved on. Her absence would always be felt. Her son would grow up without her. Her family would never hear her voice again. Her friends would always wonder what could have been. And the world would forever be missing a woman who had fought so hard to create a life that was finally hers, only to have it stolen by the very man who had once sworn to love her. Monique Aldrich was more than the way she died. She was more than the fear she once felt, more than the heartbreak she endured, more than the final moments that stole her life away. Before she became a headline, before her name was tied to tragedy, she was a woman who had built something remarkable, something powerful. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. She was a woman who refused to be ordinary, who chased success not for the sake of recognition but because she knew she was capable of more. She was a woman who inspired, who lifted people up, who made those around her believe in themselves the way she had always believed in herself. The life she had built wasn't just about personal achievement, it was about impact. She had dedicated herself to health and fitness, not just because it was her passion but because she wanted to help people feel strong, both physically and mentally. To her, strength was more than just the ability to lift weights or run faster, it was about resilience, about pushing past limits, about refusing to accept less than you deserved. She didn't just train bodies, she trained minds. She instilled confidence in her clients, made them feel capable, made them believe in themselves. She was the type of woman who left a lasting impression, who made people want to be better. Her success was the result of years of dedication, of waking up early and working long hours, of balancing motherhood with ambition, of sacrificing sleep to chase the future she had always envisioned. She had built something real, something sustainable, something she could have passed on to her children. But in the end, all of that was stolen from her in the cruelest way imaginable. Could this have been prevented? That is the question that lingers, the one that haunts those who loved her, the one that echoes in every case like hers. Could someone have done something? Could the system have stepped in? Could she have seen the danger coming before it was too late? Monique did everything she was supposed to do. She recognized the signs. She left when she realized she was not safe. She rebuilt her life. She moved on. And yet, it still wasn't enough. Because the truth is, leaving is not always the end of the story. Too often, it is just the beginning of a new kind of danger, one where the person you left refuses to let go, refuses to accept that you are no longer theirs to control. We live in a world where possessiveness is often mistaken for love, where obsession is romanticized, where people say things like, "He just loves her too much," instead of recognizing the warning signs of someone who is dangerous. We tell women to be careful, to leave at the first sign of control, to trust their instincts. But what do we tell the men who refuse to accept rejection? What do we tell the men who believe that if they cannot have someone, no one else should? This was not an accident. This was not unavoidable. This was the result of a man who believed he had the right to take a life that was no longer connected to his own. And Monique is not the only one. Every year, countless women lose their lives to the hands of men who claim to love them. They are stalked, threatened, controlled, and in too many cases, they are murdered, punished for choosing themselves, for walking away, for deciding that they deserve better. Monique Aldrich should still be here. She should be raising her son, preparing to welcome her new baby into the world, continuing to build the business she worked so hard for. She should be laughing with her friends, celebrating milestones, creating memories with the people who loved her. She should be living. Instead, she became another statistic. Another name on a growing list of women who did not get the chance to escape the men who refused to let them go. But her story does not have to end here. Her name does not have to be forgotten. Her legacy is in the lives she touched, in the people she inspired, in the strength she showed even in the face of fear. Her story is a warning, a reminder that this happens too often, that women cannot be expected to carry the burden of their own safety alone, that real change needs to happen before another life is lost. So now, the question is this: what would you have done in her place? How do you think this could have been avoided? And more importantly, how do we stop this from happening to someone else? If you believe that stories like Monique's need to be told, if you want more true crime cases that expose the harsh realities of obsession, control, and revenge, hit that subscribe button. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes, the people we fear most are the ones we once loved.